necessarily need to use the board, but if we need to break something down, we can. Okay? So why don't we go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you for making the time to attend and inviting me to do this. If you can you hear my voice okay? Do I need to speak a little louder? Perfect. So what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is, as the title says, it's about green industrial cities. And not knowing your backgrounds or what your studies and interests are, as a visiting professor, I've been delivering several lectures, mostly to do with climate, mostly to do with systems design, smart cities, net zero components. Out of all of the presentations, this one is probably the most advanced, just because of the size of it. So if I am too abstract, or if you need more details, I think you can handle all the information. I know you can handle all the information, but sometimes it's very native to me to just go over something very quickly. Just ask the questions, we'll get plenty of time to go through it. The other thing that I would say about this particular presentation, where most of my presentations deal with design or technical solutions, melted in here, this is more from an economic-based discussion. The economy of how very large programs take place. So, are we familiar with the concept of green industrial cities? Right? Kanpur would be an industrial city. We get into net zero, we put industries in place to start to make it green and a green economy coming across here. This particular program was for most of the continent of Africa, and what you see underneath here is the subset of pilots. So our pilots are actually countries, not just cities, that we are taking across here. And as I break this down, there are 3 specific groups that I'll explain what their roles are and how this comes across here. So the big idea, to give context, I always like to present where we want to end up and not be this mystery at the end of the conversation. Wow, wasn't that a revelation? What really is this about is, just like India, Africa as a continent has a growing population. They have different levels of cities. They have to figure out how this is going to work. And they have a tremendous amount of resources, but they also have always had relationships where other countries were basically using those resources, and they're very dependent on those relationships. It's also conflict. There's also a lot of variables coming across here. So there's a huge potential of resources. There is a huge potential for investment, and we have this growing population. So we first have to ask ourselves where there are existing cities, and we'll talk about this, and how that makes a logical chain. Think of it as a modern Silk Road based off of energy, based off of commerce, to get these resources. This actually represents this red line here, that we know that other entities outside of Africa have a connection, but how do we start to build this highway? And when we came to this conclusion, we asked ourselves, ultimately, what can be financed and funded, and we're talking in the trillions of dollars, and we're thinking in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and above, is really what the solution is. We asked ourselves, why do cities exist where they exist historically? And if we're creating new cities, what size should they be? How can they become green? How does industry work across here? And we said, for newer situations, if we have any chance at all, we have to deal with existing cities, but perhaps we should create new cities. And we did quantifiable measurements and studies that said new cities should be about 1.5 million people. That is just about the right size from what we know to have the right kind of transportation, the right kind of energy signatures. So if you have to build new, we should do that, but we also have to deal with the large existing cities and components. And then the second question was saying, should cities reside beside rivers, or do they run trade routes across there? And we said, let's reverse the equation, because the hardest part of doing a green industrial city is not just the LCA of product and how do you extract and how do you export. The biggest question is energy and water. So we said, let's look at the best ways for energy exists or should be going, and saying our endpoints should be the cities. So if we have a chance to put a new city in place, let's define those corridors. And what this really represents is a series of areas of how we're going to solve this problem, or how we were looking at this coming across here. So this is just a summary of what I've said before. This is a committed statement of how urbanization will be handled or addressed. It's a big problem. And what I mean by a big problem is it is a large endeavorment, and this is a challenge. When we look at large programs that are with the UN, with the G20, with COP, and we have these very important people and large amounts of dollars, a lot of things don't happen. A lot of action happens, a lot of talk happens, but do things actually take place? So having a clear statement. And for Africa, what it's really all about is it's the investment dollars. They want to be able to attract investment to come in to have this actually take place. Lots of companies or lots of countries want access to what Africa has, but are they willing to invest? So coming up with those models and also putting it into a practical position so it's not reliant on what does the UN vote this year, and where should funds go, and how does a national sovereign fund work. But you still have to play in these areas. You can't escape from it. So I'm not going to read through the statement except to say that the goal is, if we're creating cities and we're extracting resources in a responsible way, we're going to build green industrial cities, not just smart cities.
In your previous slide,
Yes.
so there is a solid yellow line and then a dotted yellow line.
I'm sorry, can you speak up?
So there is a solid yellow line and the dotted one also.
Right.
So what is that dotted yellow line?
Great question. Norway, up on the top here. So Norway has one of the most advanced set of tools and experiences in green industrial cities, and they're a partner. So Norway, with the Norwegian sovereign funds, are actually a big piece of the picture to make this investment in two ways. They can bring a tremendous amount of money and pre-existing tools and methodologies, and we'll actually explore that. So the natural extension that Norway would want back is we benefit from bringing this in here. So I'll show you in just a moment how what's inside of Africa expands beyond Africa and actually expands across here. So that's what the yellow line is that would be the natural next extension. Okay. Okay, so 3 key components to make this work. The first is Just Transition. So this is the name of an organization of African investors. So these are 15 sovereign countries that say we are going to do our financials together. We are going to make sure that there is a cohesion of how investments are distributed and decision points. So they put a single person in charge of this, a single organization, and they've pooled their attempts because they said it just would be chaos to be competing with each other. So they formed, it's like CDP, right? They've come to an agreement that they're going to do this responsibly and they're going to join funds because there's a much better likelihood that things can move forward. The second one, this is the Norway connection, starts to happen. Actually, the third one will be. The second one is United Cities. That is headquartered in Norway because of their advancement. But United Cities is the representation of cities around the world that the UN has recognized for best practices, regulatory, because if Africa is going to develop, they're going to have to sort of take the best of what's there, but also work within those other cities so that what comes out of Africa or goes into Africa makes sense for those other cities. So we had to have these guidelines and agreements so that we could do the proper agreements in place. So that was kind of our guide rails. And the Sustainability Center of Norway is the official Norwegian government that says, if you take our funds, use our technologies, we want you to be as successful as possible. And of course, it's good business for Norway also in these relationships through here. So that's kind of where the dotted line comes through. So here we've got an investment strategy. Here we know that we are doing what is coming out of UN and COP and all these areas, and to make sure where we end up will be accepted worldwide. And then this is our accelerator. working with some group that both has funding and has many tools, and we'll talk about those tools on here. 3 key elements for the partnership. This is just a picture, but it's an important picture. If you do any kind of program like this, lots of conferences, this is the Secretary General of the UN, this is the head of African investors representing $2 trillion worth of value that he makes decisions on for these 50 nations. These are many, many meetings, and they all have agendas. And what happens when you have this level of people working on something? Lots of talk, and sometimes, often, not a lot of things that happen in a timely enough manner. So how do you, in the United States, we'd say this is herding cats, or the other term we call it is a goat rodeo. You just can't control all the elements that are happening across it. But it's the reality that you have to deal with this, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to enable this. So first step that we did, we said, where are the high potential opportunities? So this is the pilot point. And in this dimension, these are the areas that we said would qualify for a pilot. Are we familiar with what an NDC is? So those are national directive commitments. So that says, as a nation or as a city, I commit to reducing my energy by X, or I'm going to do these following SDG goals with the UN, and it has specific areas. So second level is aspirational of what kind of energy commitments they're going to make, what kind of investment is going to be required for them to do this, and what kind of resources are available or needed. So we looked across the region, and we said it was these countries that could be activated as pilots or as lighthouses coming across here, and there's variations. We did that specifically. Not only were they ready to do things and had started things, but we wanted a differentiation so we could see several things. So for instance, this was about water and food. They had a clear mandate and commitments to come across here. This was more about low carbon growth in economic development centers. This was about agricultural and energy commitments. This was about adopting nature-based engineering and commitments through sustainable energy and GHG reduction. And this was priority around mining, which is one of the biggest assets that Africa brings across here. And through these countries right here, they then had their separate points. So that was what we said was going to be our lighthouse components of where we would start from. I always tell you, if there's one slide in any presentation, this is the slide, okay? So, sorry for the small type because this is also used for other reports, but this is really, let's start here. We talked about creating a corridor to connect cities. Some cities exist, some cities have to be created. That's what this circle here represents right here. It's about decarbonization, and it's about just transition. And now just transition has many different definitions depending on culture, depending on location. In this case, just transition says that there's equality that takes place along with the transition, right? That people's lives improve across there in many dimensions. And we said we would call this the circulytic corridor, because now we're talking about circular economics and LCAs and making sure that we're doing it as smart as possible to what we know we can do. And we talk about a lighthouse city, and those were the 5 cities that we chose. And then we would do pilots in other cities. They could be retrofit cities, they could be new cities. But we said this is where we would start. So we would multiply this, we'd start with 1, the first one to be in Nigeria, and then if we start to learn these things, then we take it to the other 4. And it all depends on the investment and other variables coming across here. Once we figure this out to a certain level, we spread it farther into Africa, and then we spread it more into the world. And the way it spreads into the world is through trade agreements and other aspects of why would you do the interaction and transactions. So that was the first piece. I have a blow up on this one after, so we'll talk about this in a little bit more depth, but this is how economically it works. There's resources that are demanded, right? What are the resources that are in demand? Can I access them? How can they be distributed? What's the value? So for any of the investment to take place, And for this all to work, Africa has to assure that they can actually deliver the goods. Are they capable of actually doing what they say they can do, and how reliant are they going to be from other countries and other investment sources to actually access to come across here? So this is a flywheel loop, and we can start at any point, but let's say we know we can mine, we can take some assets through here. Who's going to be the source manufacturer? Who's going to, it's happening internally? Yes, we'd like to see that, but perhaps it's Japan coming in, perhaps it's India coming in, that is going to set up that mining plant. It could be Rio Tinto. They are still going to need investors to say, this is what's going to pay for this. Does that investor come from government money? Does it come from private money? Does it come from sovereign funds? But in order to make this happen, it's all about the offtakes. So we're familiar with offtake, because sometimes I just want to make sure our lexicon is the same. That is someone who's promising to say, if you produce it, I'll buy it from you. So you're basically getting a commitment for a contract saying, I will take what you come out of mining, your rare earth mining, or whatever it is that you have to do. So if you can get these contracts, suddenly they'll say, I can put the orders in, and what happens is the investors say, this is a good thing, money is made, there's revenue streams that are proven across here, and this is all good. And what you start to do is you start to digitize it and you become a digital exchange. To put context of what's going on right now worldwide, right, we have the tariff questions. So now there's uncertainty about if I'm an off-taker, how much would I buy? What's going to be the tariffs? So it's broken this cycle. And it makes investors very wary of what's going on. And these manufacturing plants do not know what to commit to. So that's one of the big economic challenges, it's a different discussion we can have across here. Underneath all of this, there needs to be a de-risking of underwriters. So those are insurance companies that say, if you put in a mining plant, if somebody's lending you money, what happens if the project fails? How is it protected? So I'll give you a good example. So one of the areas, and I'll stay with mining to keep it in context, I won't name the mining company, but there's only like 2 or 3 of them out there. They agree that they're going to put renewable energy to source the mine, energy that has to come in there in the corridor. And it's agreed that solar is the right way to do this. So the Japanese banks, which have quite a bit of cash, the way that they're set up, agreed to invest to do the underwriting and backing of this. But when we did our calculations, it was very interesting. The payback for the size, the amount of solar arrays to actually produce enough energy, have that investment to actually operate this type of mine is 12 to 15 years. So from the time you invest in it to the time that you actually see that huge investment back, it's 12 to 15 years. The average lifespan of a mine is 10 years, and then it's tapped out. So you have this question. I need to get it, I want to use renewable energies, so how do you mitigate the risk of the fact that you probably won't see a return on investment after the mine is tapped out? So you have to come to agreements, and this banks figure out interest rates and loans and all these other things. But if it fails, somebody has to underwrite for everybody. So this is absolutely key. And then ultimately what you want to be able to see is a green is economic growth, and you keep on reducing carbon as you go through these areas. So these are the goals that you set. So how do you do this? We de-risk investments. We make sure that there are data-driven asset platforms, and I'll dive into those a little bit. There is things such as digital twins. It could be AI, it could be quantum computing, whatever the next component is, but it's about digitization. And you want to have rapid build teams. You want to be able to show things quickly that have done this, and that's part of the reason why we brought Norway into this, because they had experience, and we didn't have to relearn this across here.
What is that? What is that term about water EAS?
Oh, thank you for calling that out. So, energy as a service, right? Concepts to say where it needs to be, when it needs to be as a service. And then the obvious things. And are you familiar with Industry 5.0? So this would be the latest in manufacturing processes. So a good example would be creating green steel and using additive manufacturing perhaps So one of the ways of thinking, as an example, for, let's say, steel making in this case, the amount of heat that it takes to produce green steel, it's not just a chemical or a material science factor, but if you use hydrogen as your storage, there's enough heat that naturally comes off of, say, your hydrogen pipelines, that you can channel that heat to actually manufacture green steel. So it's a circulating process, as an example. So that's an Industry 5.0 concept.
And that bar graph that you have shown here, the economic growth is increasing.
Yes.
The reduced carbon, I can see,
Decreasing.
First it increased and then decreased.
Yes, because there's a boost of building, right? In order to, anytime you start construction, putting in the hydrogen networks, building factories, you're going to have an increase in carbon. So, and then it should start to reduce.
Will be using the conventional energy.
Yes, because you have to, right? It doesn't exist at those power sources. You're going to just have to do it, and then start to assume velocity will take place as things start to go online. Great question. Okay, this is that quick blow up of the offtake here. Thing to add to this, because it's pretty much what I said before of how explaining how offtakes work. It is about promises of paying, and it's about this digital exchange. But what we tied to this, these are real-time digital mapping of digital twins. So this is what we're calling a digital twin. It doesn't have to look like a factory you see all the buildings, but it's data that can be read and understood. And the color coding actually matches SDGs. So when we set those standards of what will happen that says it qualifies as green or against those commitments that I said why one place is a pilot, we do a pre-map of what we're going to hit, and then we collect real-time data through our digital exchange, and this tells us progress of what we're doing across here, and then we can report back and prove that the value is happening, and that triggers this continued loop going through here. And this is also a big reason why we tied in with Norway, because they had 15 years experience of building these kits. They had mapped out the entire country, so it was not an invention. I always like to look for ways to simplify things. Plus, this also ensured that Norway would put in a tremendous amount of money, and we're talking close to $500 billion into Africa by use of the systems. And they're very much generous across all of Europe and the world with their technologies. As a matter of fact, Modi is still going to make the trip, is going to be in Norway on the 16th of May to actually have discussions about connections, as things we've been talking about in this direction. Thank you. So, sorry for the small type. I'll explain it if there's anything that I'm not explaining well enough. Just I can try to blow it up on my screen. It's a little bit difficult to control this here. So, here's an example, and I'm going to break this into 3 types of examples. First, I'll tell you the theory, and then I'll actually show you an example of an actual energy one. So, in this first area, understanding what's total amount of spending, because that's always key of what's it going to cost me. So, it really breaks into 4 areas. The first area is I'm going to continue spending on high emission assets. They exist, I have to spend, it's just going on. So there's a certain percentage that I break out across there, there's a certain amount of money happening. Then I also know there's continued spending on clean energy, that assets and enabling the infrastructure. Kind of goes to that question of why is carbon rising up there during a certain period. Then I'm going to be spending on reallocated high emissions into the new kinds of systems. So there's a cost of making that transition. And then there's new spending. As I go across and say, now that I have these new systems up and coming, what is that continued maintenance and as I spend in that infrastructure come across here? So we calculate, and in this case, when I look across Africa, it's 4.5 trillion ultimately to make the transition of the goals.
Does it also include like the sequestration component of it?
Yeah.
To capture carbon and then do the storage, carbon storage doesn't?
That's also part of.
This includes this?
Yes. Yes. So how do you support this? How do you make this happen here? So one is We know there's traditional core portfolios that are going to carry high risk in developments, and there's going to be regulatory and there's going to be customer demands to push things forward. Secondly, we know that we have to address that there's returns on mature renewable themes. You know, if you're selling this idea of carbon capture and you're selling the idea of certain kinds of renewables, whether it's hydrogen or whether it's hydropower, which is very popular in the Congo, we know that some of these things will be decreasing. So for instance, solar is dropping less and less relevant because China has captured the market. So it may not be as good an investment to say hydrogen development, as an example. So understanding what those returns are and how things mature. Then understanding what the emerging themes are that can provide higher returns. So maybe the investment is in SMRs, small modular reactors that we know will come online in 10 years, but there's a better investment coming across there for Africa. And then fourth one is staying on top of government changing portfolios and directives and trade agreements. So you have to always stay with this and understand and have the lobbyists coming across here. And then how do you constantly get the right innovative partnerships to come across here? So we look at this. And then we identified what were key unlocks. What were the things that were going to unlock this puzzle to come across here? And this is just one example. So accelerated investment in grid modernization. We need to do that. If we can make that happen, a lot of these things start to become active. We also have to look at distributed storage components. Two, there was this escalation and build out of EDCIs about lithium and cobalt extracting and refining. So we know if we can achieve that, it becomes even more attractive for this whole systems here, so we have to get better at that. Building electrolyzer capacity and developing hydrogen pipelines. The big bet there is hydrogen. And this goes back to the idea of white hydrogen and how it can be extracted. Create these corridors that's going to tell us where the city should be and whether there's steel mills or cement mills or cobalt mills. It's coming across there. Then there were other things that we have to deal with residents, because people live in cities or live by cities. So looking at areas that are like heat pump production and scaling on-site deployment frameworks so that people can live where these are going on while they're being built and as they then continue to live there. And then how do we look at investment in biofuel feedstock, because it's plentiful there. So we said these were things that would ultimately allow for CapEx to take place. So those are our unlocks. And there are many other unlocks, but these are the ones we can focus with our light cities. So here's an example of one. So the way to read this is, let's say our pilot is looking at energy and power, it's looking at chemicals and materials, it's looking at food and beverage agriculture, civil automotive, all these things on here. This does not represent all these. This takes one energy, and it just takes one slice of energy, and basically it's about what's lucrative in here. How do I know what's going to predict happening, and how do I convince investors why they should be investing in this, why it's worth the effort. So these are actually market size breakdowns and the financial numbers behind it. So this category here would be, say, EV vehicle charging stations, could be a breakdown. This could be distributed generation breakdowns. This could be hydrogen generation components. This could be 3D printing construction. You know, maybe the cities are partially through here. So we do the analysis economically across here, and this could just be a whole day talking about this. So I won't go deeper into this unless there's a specific question. But this would be the kind of data that we would use to determine how is this pilot shaped going forward, because we have to make sure there's always that economic investment on here. Second breakdown is the way to explain this. We did a pilot actually in Egypt that we could point to say this is how it would work. So this is like the favorite thing in the world. This is what I love to do, to actually go out of the classroom and actually go build something and take these tools and apply these theories and do this very quickly. So Mansour University in Egypt gave us a small part of the university campus and a small part of the city, and they said, let's apply this, and we will both benefit from it. So this, what represents here, is our master model, thinking about Africa. Multiple cities, What are the interactions that will be taking place across here? I'm sorry, this isn't legible, and the way this is set, I can't pull it up on my computer for you, but there are different stage gates there's catalyzing funding partners, and there's different stages that come across here, and then there's resulting solutions and measurements through here. And I'll share this information with you and you can deep dive into this. Secondly, we created impact dashboards to know actually what was taking place from both baseline and actions coming across here. And we could do comparative to other parts of the world of how this model is working against other established areas. We had top-level planning of phases of how we would go through the program here. We had the diagrams of governance going through here that would work. And then we had our flow patterns and our systems designs through here. This, you can once again recognize these digital twin patterns that are coming up here. So in a 4-month period, we defined the hypothesis. We took 2 buildings, we took 1 industrial plant, and we took a little bit of the outside residence, and we actually initiated and were able to define the map, generate the dashboards, start the flow to look at the data. Now, we did not get to complete this. This started 4 months before the Gaza thing. So it just wasn't safe for people to stay there. But these were the tools that we were able to transfer out of Norway. That's how we got it up so quickly. And it was enough proof to say this could work in Africa. We had enough data to go through here. So we did a very crisp thing. One of the lessons that I've learned or have been taught is if you're going to solve a problem and you list out the conditions, so let's say you have 4 conditions for it to be successful. We often look at the first one, the simplest one to solve, and then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. What I actually strongly recommend is you identify those, take the hardest one first, and look at that one. Because it doesn't matter if you solve the other 3, because if you get to the hardest one, you can't solve it, then you don't have the right thing set up. So identify it, go with your harshest critic, prove to them, understand what they have to see out of it in order to say, should this proceed, or you're just wasting your time. The other lesson is that unless you have, no matter how good your idea is, you have to be able to measure to say, is there at least a minimum of 40% confidence level that this could work? Because if you don't achieve that, it's not going to happen. The other side of it is saying, how much information do you need to understand before you start something? And I would say, don't go beyond 70%. You know enough information between 40% and 70% to get something going. And if you spend more time after 70% and say, I can't start till I learn more, you're just wasting time and money. By then you should know, and then you should understand risk. So my hardest condition is, can I get the land? I know the tools work. I have the theory. I have to get the investors convinced. So my whole idea of showing this was to go into the reinsurance folks and go into the investor side and saying, will you support a project like this? And that's what this did serve, to get things activated. So that was my hardest condition that I had to go through. Always ask this question. It always sounds good of why do you do something? Well, why cities? Why do I need cities as endpoints? Well, the fact is I have large populations. Now, there are shrinking populations in other countries. The reason I'm here on campus is to look at a net neutrality program for campus, and also looking at a larger area across India, saying what happens as the population grows and the cities get bigger. And I question saying, do people actually need to go into the cities, or should the industry come to where people are? Which is what I think is the right solution. So it's always good to understand, but in this case, cities are really important because they are responsible for 80% of the GDP currently, globally. So you have cities. But they're also responsible for using 70-80% of the energy signatures. So these are just facts. So you have to solve for this, and this program for Africa is to take on 10,000 cities. So it's a big chunk to figure out. So like any other systems thing, I start with 5 countries, I start with 5 cities. If I can figure it out for 5, then I can start worrying about the 10,000. The other thing that we did is we made sure there was a charter. So when you have lots of groups making lots of big decisions, they have to have what we call a North Star, a declared statement that anybody can understand. It went through lots of back and forth diplomatically to come across here, but ultimately we came up with a statement that not only within the group could understand, but the public could understand through there. Everybody could say that same narrative across there. So it basically said that we would achieve the following things by going through this program. I'm going to keep on time here, so there's time for some questions, so I won't read you through the charter here. This is super important. It's all about investors. Ultimately, this is what I have to prove to. So it's to prove somebody that if you invest in green industrial cities, it's better than investing in AI, or it's better than investing in gold, or it's better investing in maritime economy. So I have to fulfill these discussions as a green city designer. It says what's investable from regulatory incentives, what's investable from the transition, and ultimately how is the workforce going to take place come across here. And then there's subcategories of each of these, whether it's investment, risk, return on investment, insurance, infrastructure, productivity, and so forth and so forth. And then there are subcategories that are all listed out in the research and the report so that they can have a prospectus and a pro forma to know where those investments are, and they either believe in the case or they don't believe in the case. There's a risk and reward, everything that you do. You take a risk, you get a certain reward coming across here. I know that this is not legible, so I'll just call these out for you through here. So it was about de-risking the program. So as we go along this journey, and we were asking anything from small investments to large investments is what your risk tolerance is. So this actually reads from the bottom up. So the investments that I'm looking at, investments in data, the data exchange, investments in people, workforce, and the people that are going to do this, investments in understanding networks and partnerships, and the huge values of what takes place there and how those relations go. Investments in living labs, like the Cairo example. How much does it cost to do? What do I prove? How long should it exist? Coming across there. Investments in catalytic technologies. What are the sets of technologies that you have and what are going to come that you know about, and things that you think are going to come, and where will that create velocity? Some will win and some won't win. So how much investment? There's a higher level of risk, but it's much more likely needing a higher level of investment. And then investment in infrastructure. That's huge, right? So small investors feel comfortable down here. Large investors need to do this. So that's how we start to break that down. Practical. How do we go across there? Very simple plan. Step one, we come up with a shared innovation operating system. So how can we implement these templates? How can we create those lighthouse city points? How do we establish what is a green industrial city accounting system, because we're about investors? And how do we invest in the human capital? Step two, how do we accelerate those first industrial cities to come across here? So assessing the performance and the potential of those areas. How do we set up the projects? How do we know that they're running, they're accountable to come across here? And making sure that we're building them green and everything that we intended to do. And then the third level is how do we recruit and scale what is needed in order to go beyond, because as a team, we can only do so much. Ultimately, things have to be decarbonized, they have to be democratized. It takes a lot more than just the initial group. They have to be digitized so that democratization takes place. They have to be demonstrated, and they have to be remonetized. So this is the scaling factor of coming across there. So it's these three steps that we take in our flow path. So as we implement this, these are the same level of risks that we talked about, saying we have to do all of these things in order to prove it out. But now we're tying it back to that initial sector that I said, how do I create that flywheel? So I have governments that I'm dealing with. I have academia, because that's where the research is coming through. I've got civil society. I'm dealing with civil governments, I'm dealing with local populations, I'm dealing with businesses, and I'm dealing with investors, and it all has to work. And in the center, I've put a living lab so that there is a way of controlling what it is that we're creating. There's proof points. So generally, a living lab has three components in my experience: academia, corporate component, and a city or some public thing, so I can have a physical aspiration of proof. So one that I did was with BP Energy, and with Emphasis, while I was at Emphasis, we got BP to use emphasis campuses to experiment on new energy technologies. And as they came online, we migrated them into the city of Pune. So there was a test ground, and then it was proven, and it went across here. So that is a working model across here. And because we always have to do this, this once again is featuring, I had a set of tools. I wasn't going to sit and waste my time inventing the new dashboards. I already had 15 years worth of data of how to set up the benchmarks and already mapped to these, the SDGs. And of course they would change across here, but I already had these models. I put these online in 3 weeks into what we're working on. And I have currently up in Norway, I think I have a slide on this actually. Yeah. So this lab has been around since 2019 to 2022, this specific lab. They have over 10,000 data points of communities. Now their biggest city is not even a neighborhood on your campus, right? You know, their size. So when they look at urban areas, they have a couple of large cities, but they say anything above 10,000 and above population qualifies, and that's what they've collected the data on. So they have a tremendous set of simulation because they had mapped their coast for minerals years ago, and they reused those tool sets to apply it towards understanding industrial ingredient areas. So we were able to lift that technology, we were able to access the funds and use that lab, and now we're actually kind of building an extension of Norway into this region. Is one of the plants that I'm working on right now, and then to spread it across there. And in return, there's going to be some deals going back and forth. So this, what was learned in Europe is being transferred to Africa in this case, in those relationships. And I'm also trying to do this right now in India. And then this just highlights the other partners. Need a huge energy partner, right? So we're always trying to simplify. So we've got the commitment from TGN Energy to say we will build the first hydrogen corridors with you. We have enough technology, and we will put some investments that they're that high risk, high cost investment. So they agreed to take 2 cities to come across there and to in exchange for contracts. So we assured that that was happening. This is the construction. Someone's got to build it, right? It's got to take place. It's got to be very real coming across there. And then we talk about the next investment. So ultimately, what you do, you get your footprint. You have to get back to the goal of creating a better society, changing over what Africa is. It's a proverb that I use over and over again, right? And actually we use this to measure how well our experiments are going to be. So if your plan is for 1 year, you plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, you plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, you educate children. So we had to look at all 3 levels to say things had to get done quickly in some areas, some others could have longer term components, and some could have very long term components coming across here. And this is not just important from society, but it also attracts very large, long-term thinking organizations to say why they will support the investments and why this will come across here. And we created internship programs. So this is a democratization site. So it wasn't just schools and it wasn't just consultants or companies. We actually drove internships at all different levels of education and community involvement in order to learn how to do this, in order to be participants for this to stick across here. And ultimately what this results in, a huge amount of research data that is shareable, that allows for investment to take place and allows for us to create those cities as quickly as possible. And also what is happening and what's not happening. Now this is becoming more advanced with AI components, but AI has been around for a long time, honestly, but we're able to do more intricate calculations. So I've started using SoC chips, so systems on design chips, in order to do calculations. We're using a lot of GIS systems in order to measure output. We might have done it in other ways. So we're getting much more advanced data, and we're going more machine-to-machine direct. And sometimes humans aren't even seeing the data coming across here. But that's how the investment world works. Only when I build these systems, just like we look at trading and cryptocurrency and all these decision points, it's the only way you can get your head around this. And it's the only way you convince these large companies to come across here. So this is the program. 2 years in the making, from let's do this to actually identify the countries, to actually setting up commitments from 5 countries to come across here, getting that proof done first in Egypt, which is the first city, and we've now moved to 2 other cities. So we've started this journey. There's a lot of things going on in the world right now where Africa is becoming very much fought over because of China and the US and rare earth minerals, but that's more uncertainty for investors, and that's still who I have to go with, but at the same time, we're building things. So that's what I wanted to present today. I think we're right on time. It's up to you whether you want to keep me out of the room or whether you want to take some questions or however you'd like to do.
10:50.
10:50 on the dot. I'm good at that because I got it done on time, right?
Yeah, a couple of questions if there are from behind.
Anybody going to do this for a living? Does anybody want to create green industrial cities with me? I mean, this is fun stuff.
Anyone maybe interesting internship there and all.
Sure. Okay. And I was highlighting Norway. There are other partners. Japan, even India has relationships with us. But this was the actual story, and they were the ones involved with this. It's only one of those 3 spots there. Anyway, hear the bell. Thank you for your time. I don't want to take the classroom, but I'll stand outside for a while if you have any questions, if you don't have to get to class. And we'll make this material available to you. Okay? And then if you're interested in those reports, I can also make available to you what's those actual reports and access to those tools. Okay? Excellent. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Excellent. I have my picture.